This is A Sustainable Mind, episode 13. Welcome to A Sustainable Mind podcast, where we delve into the minds behind today's most impactful environmental campaigns, organizations, and startups, inspiring the environmental changemakers of tomorrow. I'm your host, Marjorie Alexander. Tim Silverwood is an educator, environmentalist, and speaker. He co-founded Take 3, a clean beach initiative, asking everyone to complete one simple action each time they visit the beach, waterway, park, or anywhere else, and that is taking 3 pieces of litter with you when you leave. Tim has also participated in research of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, co-founded Circular Economy Australia, and is the director of Rechusable. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about how the environment and sustainability played a part in your life growing up?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I was really fortunate. I think, my mother had a pretty major influence on me. I think she's green in her core, and that played out really nicely in me and her and the rest of the family moving to a lovely bushland property when I was probably about 6 or 7 years old. So from that time on, I was allowed to frolic and play in a natural environment. And that, to me, is certainly a very important part of me being who I am and defining how I treat the environment and therefore want to protect it. I just love that notion that, you protect what you love. That's a natural instinct. So I had that in me, and that also increased exponentially as around the age of 10, I started to get a bit more competent in the ocean. So myself and my friends would go out on as many occasions as we could on weekends and spend hours upon hours learning how to ride, boogie boards, bodyboards at first, and then that sort of progressed to really embracing it as a sport. And then it hasn't really stopped since. So I've sort of been surfing in the ocean on various crafts for 25 years. And to me, I suppose surfing and that connection with the ocean has really defined my passion for sustainability, and particularly triggered me to get heavily involved with plastic pollution.
In terms of you getting into the workforce as a young adult, to be able to work on something that's so close to your core values is really not something that a lot of people have an opportunity to do. But is it something that you were able to engage in immediately, or did you have to take kind of a detour in terms of your experience in the workforce?
I probably didn't have to, but I did. For me, it was interesting. So I was attracted to subjects, geography and biology and anything to do with the natural world. But particularly, I suppose, in that realm of geography, it was about how humans played a role within the natural world, how we had positive impacts and, of course, how we had negative impacts. So following what we have over here in terms of high school, I went to university and studied a Bachelor of Science with a major in sustainable resource management. And that was really built a lot around the founding principles of ecologically sustainable development. And I must admit, I went in with high ambitions. This felt right. It felt good. I was finally going to get some major qualification that would allow me to get out there and change things for the better. But most of the employment opportunities after graduating were working for government, and all the case studies and personal experience I could find suggested that government would have quite often the right intentions, but their hands were somewhat tied by the overarching needs for development. So it didn't feel like I was going to be able to realize my potential in that way. And then the other opportunity, I suppose, was going into the corporate realm, when there's lots of environmental officers and roles in Australia in things like the mining industry. It employs a huge number of people, but that didn't feel right either. Like, how could I go there and understand what needed to be done, but the overarching premise there was that, well, these projects need to go ahead anyway. So I ended up sitting on my passion and desire for a little while, traveling the world. And it was during those years traveling the world, which I sort of considered to be my second university degree, that I saw this pollution problem. I saw how an issue really wasn't being addressed and came back after that with a real fire in the belly and said, I think I know what I want to do now. I want to work in the not-for-profit sector, and I really want to try and strive for positive change on these seemingly common sense issues of stopping pollution and reducing waste.
So how did the idea come about for Take 3? And Take 3 is a clean beach initiative, and if anyone's interested, you can visit take3, TAKE, the number 3.org.au. But what was the driving force between what you were experiencing as a child and as a young adult to saying, okay, I'm going to actually make this happen. I'm going to take the initiative to create an organization with co-founders and actually make this official. What exactly happened to make you want to follow that path?
It was a really great set of circumstances. So I'd made a decision that I was working on trying to get more surfers to start cleaning beaches and join me in these efforts. And through doing that, a great connection was made with the two other co-founders of Take 3, Amanda Marichal and Roberta Dixon-Volk. Now, Amanda had responded to first discovering about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and Charles Moore was getting a lot more exposure around this time. There were some big current affairs programs coming out, and it really rattled Mandy to the core. She's like, I'm a surfer. I didn't know about this. Why aren't we all talking about this? And so she reached out to someone in her network, Roberta Dixon-Volk, who's a marine ecologist and already knew a lot about this problem, and said, Roberta, we have to do something. So the Take 3 for the Sea concept was developed by Mandy and Roberta, and then I was invited in to say, we've got this idea, can you help us? And so in the spirit of collaboration, I jumped straight in, and it was just chemistry from the beginning. And so this is back in 2009, and we just started realistically addressing the issue in our local community. But I must admit, even at those early stages, I recognized that the simplicity in that message of Take 3, which is essentially just says, take 3 pieces of rubbish with you when you leave the beach, waterway, park, or anywhere, and you've made a difference. We thought, wow, if you get enough people doing this, it's going to have a real impact. And I suppose there's the obvious benefit in that every piece of trash is a hazard to wildlife. So removing a piece of trash is a very rewarding and beneficial thing. But for me, it was about how we could use that simple action as a conversation starter. And that's really what's driven our success. It doesn't take much to explain what it's about. Anyone can embrace the idea, and it's just the start. Once you take 3, you're going to start to look at the bigger picture and say, okay, well, I don't want to keep picking this stuff up, so what can we do to stop it getting here in the first place?
Right. I don't want to jump too far ahead here, but speaking of your co-founders and really in the spirit of collaboration, coming together and combining your resources and your knowledge, what would you say have been some of the more, I don't want to say more important, but more strategic partnerships that you've made with either other individuals, other organizations, other agencies that you feel has really helped drive the success of this organization so far?
Yes, certainly. So the beautiful thing about the plastic pollution issue is, in the 6 years that we've been around, we've grown from a handful of groups globally working on this issue to quite a serious cluster. There are lots of projects that have emerged in recent years. But from the very early days, we were starting conversations with whoever was existing in our state, our national, and also the global level there. And I was very fortunate in 2011 to go out with Marcus Ericsson from 5 Gyres and the Algalita Marine Research Institute and do one of their expeditions to the North Pacific subtropical gyre. So we spent 3 weeks out there in 2011, and then I was in North America and meeting some of these movers and shakers I'd been reading about and trying to connect with for years. And so it was really quite easy to develop relationships with the right people internationally. But I think in terms of answering your question, Australia has found ourselves in a really remarkable situation in being somewhat leaders on this issue. We've got some incredible community groups and not-for-profits that have emerged in recent years, but that's also been met with some wonderful national alliances. So we are part of a really important alliance called the Boomerang Alliance, and they have been the ones that have essentially been driving the the political conversation and the lobbying from that side of the argument on bottle bills. So we have now, since recent years, had one state adopt a bottle bill, and we have another one starting by mid-July 2017. This is where you get a refund when you return your beverage container for recycling, and it has incredibly powerful impacts of over doubling the recycling rate here in Australia, and also working hard on things like plastic bag bans and banning the products that contain microbeads. So we have a really, really good opportunity in Australia to be leaders on this issue, and I think that's what you'd almost come to expect. I mean, Australia is an island, and around about 80% of our population lives within 50 kilometres of the coastline. So if we're not showing leadership on ocean conservation issues, then something's wrong. So I, despite the scale of this problem being vast, I do have optimism that Australia can show real leadership and therefore influence other parts of the world.
Amazing. Something that I think I read on your Instagram profile, there was some image and it said that 70% of the litter in our oceans actually sinks. I could not believe that number. And when I was thinking about that, I thought, well, anything that's in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is floating. I mean, those are the things that we see. Those are the things that you're collecting when you're sailing by on one of your research expeditions. That's just absolutely astounding. And how are people really getting involved with your organization that if they hadn't been acquainted with you all prior to that? Or how can anyone get involved, really?
Well, I think you sort of, you sort of hit the nail on the head there, in the sense that a simple one-line comment on our Instagram channel, which is at Take3CleanBeach, can lead someone like yourself to going, wow, I did not know that, and therefore starting the broader conversation. And that sort of comes down quite a bit to our strategy. We've always wanted to keep our messaging simple, to keep it fun, and obviously make it engaging. So essentially we're educating in the hope that people will be inspired to do more. So that's the beauty of the Take 3 message. And I think the post you're referring to showed, one of our supporters out there having a snorkel in the beautiful Sydney Harbour and picking up trash, and she's finding straws and PET bottles and all these things on the bottom of our beautiful harbour. And so we do need to start the conversation around that particular statistic. A lot of plastic is more dense than seawater, so therefore it will find its way on the bottom. Yeah, we don't see it, but that doesn't mean it's not there. And when you start to do examination of the major problems of microplastic pollution, this is where microbeads come into it, as well as microfibers. Sediment samples are coming back from all around the world showing massive levels of pollution in the sediment layer. And that's important because there's a very large community of organisms that live in that benthic community, and they are fundamentally important to the remainder of the food web, and that's major portal of microplastic pollution into the food chain. So yeah, we've got a lot of educating to do, but the hope is that always our education will result in people then wanting to take that and do something positive with it.
What do you feel like is one of the main challenges to moving forward in terms of global ocean conservation, and also how do you think we can help move that along as citizens?
Oh man, there are so many and they are so big. I mean, you just have to acknowledge that, as Sylvia Earle says, no blue, no green. Without a healthy ocean, there is no healthy us. So unless we're acknowledging the massive scale, the devastation that we're causing to our oceans, unless that is part of the top line conversation, then we are missing it. We are missing the significance of the impact that we're having on our oceans. So certainly ocean acidification is just such an alarming issue, and we're seeing massive impacts with that here in Australia with the Great Barrier Reef. I mean, overfishing to me is just a travesty. So I've made a lot more conscious decisions around how I bring seafood into my life. I've drastically reduced the amount of seafood I'll eat, and I'm much more conscious about where it's coming from. I just think we have to change the status quo with how we're, what's the quote I like to say is we take from the ocean all that we need and we just give it back all that we don't. And that is no way to treat our Mother Ocean. So we need a big shift. And I do think it's happening. We have some incredibly powerful platforms now for conversation and turning that into action, with marine parks globally and wonderful institutions like IUCN and the United Nations Environment Program. So we do have the opportunity, but governments need to change and international policy needs to change, because there's all these areas in the ocean that are just, not even policed. There is no man's land where anything can happen, and it's just quite wrong.
Yeah. What is one unexpected gift, something you've received on a personal level as far as co-founding this organization and the other organizations that you're involved in, including what's called Rechusable? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, well done, yes.
And the Circular Economy Australia, that's another organization that you co-founded. What do you feel is just one of the biggest gifts that you've received on a personal level from creating all of this that was really unexpected to you?
I mean, it's the gift of finding what it is that you not only wanted to do in your life, but were perhaps meant to do. I think that's top of everyone's list, right? You want to end up in a career or a lifestyle or a pathway to doing what you love and doing what feels rewarding. And I have to pinch myself that I've found myself in that way. I mean, don't be alluded to the fact that it's not challenging. I've made an incredible amount of personal sacrifices to get to this stage, but not losing sight of how great it feels, it's just, I feel really, really, really lucky that I've been able to find this opportunity and to make it work. So onwards and upwards, I can't wait for what comes next.
So actually, let's talk about that. What is coming next for Take 3 and you personally?
Take 3 still has a really important role to play. We obviously are very happy with our success, despite what it may appear. It's still a very grassroots project. We have a small cluster of about 8 volunteers that essentially run our programs. So you might see on social media, fundamentally that is part of our education and marketing campaign. But in the real world, so to speak, we run active programs going into schools. So we visit young people, even in sort of preschool age groups, right the way through to what you'd consider to be college. That's really a backbone of our operations. We also work with a range of different partners in delivering other programs. We work with the surfing community and what we have over here in surf clubs. So Take 3 will continue to work hard, because face-to-face education, workshops, getting people out there and cleaning up and doing citizen science is so fundamentally important. Obviously, we won't be coming over and doing many school visits in North America anytime soon, but that's where I suppose scaling up our ability to educate online is a really major priority for us, and also further expanding our global Take 3 program. So in the early days, we were approached by passionate individuals in other parts of the world who said, hey, can we use the Take 3 message in our community? And we sat down and we said, well, that sounds great, because that's exactly what we want to do. We actually want to make a significant difference on this issue globally. So we've got an international partnerships program, and we're really looking at how we can continue to use Take 3 as essentially that entry-level action that can really educate a broad number of people. So Take 3 has a really rich future, but essentially we have our challenges too, because you've got to try and turn what is a passion project into a sustainable business. So plenty of challenges there, but I'm enjoying every step of the way of the journey.
Absolutely. I want to take a second and turn a little bit to you personally. What was one thing that might have been holding you back? Not necessarily for Take 3, because you did have co-founders, and like you said earlier, they did approach you. But is there anything that in your past has kind of held you back as far as moving along this current path that you're on towards ocean conservation and being an environmentalist in general?
I think certainly there's the moment when you put yourself out on a limb and say, you know what, I'm actually going to focus on this project. I'm going to leave the security of a full-time job and make this work. So that was probably the really pivotal moment. And I can only say there I was fortunate enough to have a fabric of people around me, a supportive family, supportive partners that have allowed me to do that. So that may not be as easy for everyone, but once again, coming back to that whole idea of risk versus reward, if you know in yourself that this is gonna work, which I seemingly did and continue to profess, then it's worth that challenge. It's worth overcoming those obstacles.
That's fantastic advice for people who are considering making that leap. And something that I was constantly wondering was, well, I know that in environmental science and in sustainability, there are careers out there, but it feels like a very new field, at least here in the United States. And to figure out where you fit professionally and how you can make a living doing what you love, working in this field, there is really no path that's predefined. I think a lot of people are like, well, I'd love to do this, but I'm just not sure what my career options are. And of course, people like you've been exposed to the environment from a very, very young age. So in some ways, it's kind of a no-brainer, but for others, I think that they don't even realize that it's an option. So to kind of throw caution to the wind and say, risk versus reward, I'm going to take this risk. This is something that I'm going to just be all in about, is actually really great advice for people who do feel as though they can take that leap. It's really important to kind of look at yourself and figure out if it's for you. And if it is, why not?
That's right. I mean, we're writing the rule book as we speak around how we attack these significant issues. And I'm constantly meeting people around Australia and the world, and you meet someone and you can just see that they are on this journey. They might be in the very, very early stages doing some volunteering with a program, but it's pretty clear to see the people who are going to be the stayers and are going to be there in the years to come. So in that regard, I don't think necessarily you don't need the degrees, you don't need the qualifications necessarily. You just need to find yourself working alongside like-minded people or a similar group and just get the experience, because we're not going to be going, hopefully, fingers crossed here, we're not going backwards on these issues. You can't unknow what you already know, and that's the sort of attitude and the momentum that we have now. So certainly using Australia as a case study, it's all heading in the right direction, and I can only hope, and I try and keep my finger on the pulse with these issues globally, and I'm seeing similar momentum. Obvious massive challenges, but the momentum is in the right direction.
Speaking of keeping your pulse on these issues, do you have an internet resource that you can suggest for our listeners to keep abreast of the issues, the news, and ways that they can get involved in ocean conservation and in other environmental organizations and causes?
Oh, certainly just having the right, if you are savvy on social media, then following the right accounts is key. And there's certainly some ones like Plastic Pollution Coalition, Story of Staff, Five Gyres. These guys are all delivering some really, really effective messaging via those social media channels. If you're particularly interested in the marine debris plastic pollution issue, then there's a wonderful resource comes out of a guy in Brazil running an account called Global Garbage, and he sends around a email newsletter summarizing all the academic journal articles that have come out on these issues. And you can read that once or twice a week and understand exactly what's happening in the various research institutions around the world working on these issues. But if it's another issue that you're looking into, then do some digging, and I'm sure there's a wonderful fabric of people once again that are communicating openly about the issues that you're interested in.
Excellent. And if anyone
podcasts are good, aren't they?
I should hope so. Yeah. I hope I'm providing some a useful resource for people. Absolutely. And if anyone is interested in visiting these resources, don't worry, you don't have to write them down now. You can go to asustainablemind.com and search Tim Silverwood, and his show notes will pop right up with a link to all of the resources and everything that's been talked about during this conversation. So in addition to that, do you have any books that you can recommend that have a little bit more to do with mindset specifically when it comes to environmentalism?
There's some great ones out there, aren't there? I really like, there's a couple of Australian authors that I really, really enjoy reading. Professor Tim Flannery writes some really compelling books on the role of humans in the biosphere. He's got one that is called Here on Earth, and that really helped me in the early stages of feeling a bit more power in being able to express the enormity of the challenges that we face in sustainability. Paul Gilding, he's written a really compelling one, The Great Disruption, but I also read all the ones related to plastics. So, Captain Charles Moore's book, Plastic Ocean, was very good, and there's a huge number of other books out there that are on my list, so I can always send a bit of a list along to add to the talk notes if you wish.
Absolutely. So that would be The Great Disruption by Paul Gilding.
Paul Gilding, yeah.
Yeah, and
Professor Tim Flannery, his book.
Yeah, those are excellent. I have read pieces of The Great Disruption. I haven't had the chance to read it cover to cover with grad school and everything, but it's definitely on my list. And if anyone is interested in receiving these books on audio for free, you can actually visit ASM, as in A Sustainable Mind, asmbook.com to get a free audiobook. So that'll be pretty cool.
That sounds great.
So, winding down here, it's been a pretty long journey, start to finish, being that kid who's going to the beach, surfing and snorkeling, to where you are now, experiencing the amount of success that you are with Take 3 and your other organizations. Looking back, is there anything that you would have done differently if you just took all of the steps so far and condensed them into really just a couple of years? What were some of those missteps or pitfalls that you can help others who are listening avoid or overcome more quickly? Is there any advice that you have for them?
Yeah, I think certainly on the organizational front, keeping my finger on the pulse, as I said before, and looking out across the global web, there is just so many people starting projects. And that's awesome. It really is great that people have got an idea and are using that to make a positive impact. It's just really when it comes to scaling up your idea into a legitimate, safe and secure organization, never underestimate what that actually means. And in the early days, it was certainly it was discussed by many people around me. It's really important to establish your internal governance and to build a structure and a fabric which is going to lead to essentially your project being like a business. So in that regard, maybe it is about using your idea, keeping the ownership of that, but looking around you. Is there other groups or organizations that are already established that maybe your idea can sink in with? Because you might find yourself a whole lot less stressed out and challenged, because it is no mean feat to develop and run a sustainable organization. It is quite challenging.
That's actually excellent advice. Is there any final parting piece of guidance, or even just something that I forgot to ask you that you'd like to share with our audience?
I suppose for me, it's interesting that 6-7 years ago, for me, this issue wasn't really on my radar, and I certainly wasn't investing a huge amount of time on it. And in that time, we have seen globally such a dramatic increase in attention. So I know when people read all the media reports that come out about the vast enormity of new plastic going into the oceans every year, the impacts of wildlife and what it means for us, it can seem extremely challenging, but we've only been causing this problem for 5 or 6 decades, and we have a really unique opportunity to turn that around now. For me, plastic pollution is a real metaphor for the greater challenges that we face in relation to consumption and this notion of living in a linear economy, that we just accept the fact that we bring all these products into our lives that have a very short lifespan, and then it's okay that we just throw them all away afterwards. You know, plastic pollution in the ocean is systematic of this broken system. So that's where talking about zero waste, that's where talking about the circular economy really comes into its own. And I can only hope that there's as much happening in the conversations in North America, where other people are listening into this podcast today, to really acknowledge that a lot needs to change, and that change starts with having the conversation. So get educated and start talking.
Absolutely. And the way that people can get in touch with you is through your website, take3.org.au. And also you can find Take3 on Instagram and Twitter at Take3CleanBeach. That's their username. They've got an amazing Instagram profile that I follow, and actually offers some really cool insights and some interesting facts. A lot of them are disturbing and will kind of, wake you up as to the ocean pollution issue, but it's a really interesting profile to follow. So I definitely encourage you guys to do that. And also you can learn more about Tim at timsilverwood.com. That's Tim Silverwood, SILVERWOOD.com. So Tim, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your experiences, getting these organizations off the ground, and really how you got into the environmental sector altogether.
And well done to you as well. I mean, we're on the same page there in that we aim to educate, to inspire, and that's exactly what your podcast is doing. So congratulations.
You've been listening to A Sustainable Mind podcast. To hear more interviews just like this one, please subscribe on iTunes or visit asustainablemind.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.